Arguably more integral to your performance in a video game is not the character whom you're playing, but the equipment they're carrying, and Genshin Impact is no exception to that rule. Whilst wide roster of units come with their own individual properties and strengths, tapping into that potential comes down to how well you arm them, from artifacts to talent levels to character experience to constellations, but most essentially to weapons. The release of every 5-star event banner is accompanied by an epitome invocation, also known as the weapon banner. Here you will find a pool of featured weapons with an increased drop rate, consisting of 4 and 5-star weapons usually not found in the standard banner. The 5 stars in particular are weapons tailor-made for whichever 5-star character or characters are being promoted in that cycle. For instance, at the time of writing this video, Yelan's event banner is in effect until late June alongside a rerun of Xiao. So the weapon banner for this period features the Aqua Simulacra, Yelan's weapon of choice, and the Primordial Jadewing Spear, which is available in the standard wish but is primarily wielded by Xiao. This is how the release and distribution of equipment has been handled ever since version 1.0. Unlike most other gacha titles where the means to gear out your characters is handled in-game, for this one, virtually all of your weapons are to be acquired via summons or wishes, whichever terminology suits your fancy. Having recently covered this game's extortion and pricing model not too long ago, as well as a video earlier this year on the game's artifact system, I figured it's worth delving into how weapon design affects player experience in this game. So let's go through the various problems regarding weapons in Genshin Impact. Equipment is a core part of any video game with a statistical foundation, as a means to externally increase the effective rating of an entity not unlike that of real life. Ultimately, how influential said equipment is comes down to the man or woman using it. Even so, there's only so much a person can do without the right means to handle a situation, and no medium showcases this more than video games. You could be one of the best players in the world at a certain game, but if what you have to work with isn't able to make best use of your capabilities, you're not going to get very far. Many of you might have heard the saying bringing a knife to a gunfight at least once in your life, which is an idiom used to describe entering a confrontation or other challenging situation without being adequately equipped or prepared. In other words, there has to be a fine balance between the sword and the swordsman. Some genres apply this concept more literally than others. In a turn-based RPG like Pokemon, your equipment would be the party of 6 that you carry, and the stats, levels, and held item of each Pokemon would be the specs of those equipment. No matter how extensive your knowledge of the game is, your party of level 50 Pokemon will almost always be outmatched by a party of level 100s. Now before you go off in the comments about various gimmicky strategies like Focus Sash, Endeavor, Quick Attack, Rattata, or Steady Nose Passive Pain Split, I'm aware I've played competitive Pokemon before. But outside of those edge cases, the primary and sometimes only way to succeed in Pokemon is to level up your team sufficiently enough for the task at hand. Of course, there are titles where execution holds a higher share of equity and performance than the tools at your disposal, such as in fighting games like Super Smash Bros., where characters held in poor regard by the court of public opinion can easily outclass those held in high regard through skill alone. That being said, the limits are still there, hence why all of the game's top players champion fighters higher up in the tier list in conjunction with their impressive aptitude. So where in the spectrum is Genshin, a game that appears to possess attributes from either side? On one hand, it's an RPG, which places heavy emphasis on stats, levels, characters, and whatnot. On the other hand, it's an action RPG, real-time combat instead of turn-based interaction, so one's mechanics play just as critical of a role. I would say it's right in the middle. An incessantly debated topic circulating the community discussion boards for as long as I can remember is whether or not 5-star characters are all that much better than 4 stars, to an extent that justifies their exorbitant price tag anyway. And the same conversation existed for weapons as well, which cost just as much if not more than the very units that use them. Assuming average luck, to get your hands on both a featured 5-star and their signature weapon, it will cost you anywhere between $300 to $500 a paywall that's hard for more than 90% of the player base to scale on a monthly basis, given that a new unit and weapon is introduced at least once a month. Weapons in this game are surprisingly very simple in terms of constitution. There are 5 weapon types: swords, claymores, polearms, bows, and catalysts. Each one comes with an attack stat and substat, though only one versus an artifact's 4. And unlike artifacts, both parameters are the same and increase the same way, so you don't have to worry about pulling for multiple copies just to get a good roll, thankfully. Additionally, they have a weapon passive, much like an artifact set bonus. Consuming additional copies of the same weapon will increase its refinement level in the same fashion as constellations, although it's colloquially agreed upon that the level-to-level increase is negligible and certainly not worth going the extra mile for, at least for 5 stars. That's really about it. It's one of the more straightforward progression systems in Genshin, since all you have to do is get it to max level and that's all she wrote. But even though the stats of a weapon remain constant, the way their substats and passives are formatted gives off an impression of exclusivity, even if every bow-wielding unit is able to equip every bow in the game, or any sword-wielding unit can equip any sword. And this brings us to the issues surrounding Genshin's weapon system. Despite there being no set criteria for using equipment other than being compatible with its type, weapons in this game, especially 5-star ones, are implicitly biased towards a singular character or at most a couple rather than all of them or even a specific playstyle. Here are a few examples of what I mean. Let's look at Song of Broken Pines, Eula's weapon of choice which grants bonus physical damage for its substat, and a passive that increases your attack speed after striking 4 times, heavily inferring that this is most efficient on Eula, who wants bonus attack speed to get more hits in before Glacial Illumination's Aftershock. The physical damage substat basically solidifies that the only ones who can use this weapon are physical damage claymore units with an attack style specifically involving normal and charge attacks. Conveniently, Razor enjoys SBP just as much as Eula, but on everyone else it's much less efficient. Another one would actually be the new Aqua Simulacra. It has the highest crit damage substat value in the game, tied with Redhorn Stone Thresher at 88.2%. Going off of just the stats, any DPS bow user would be dying to have this, at least until you look at the passive. First, it increases your base HP, that alone should tell you something, then it boosts your damage by 20% when there are enemies nearby. For those who don't know, Yelan is an HP damage scaler much like Hu Tao, explaining the HP bonus. Additionally, despite being a bow user, she specializes in fighting up close thanks to her elemental skill, so she naturally fights in melee range along with the rest of her party. Furthermore, her elemental burst is a persisting effect. There are no DPS bow users besides Yelan who scale off of health, so the HP bonus is irrelevant for everyone else, meaning the only character that we know of so far who benefits from the full scope of this weapon's power is Yelan. One could argue that Ganyu and Child can utilize this weapon very well since the former has a very strong persisting ultimate and the latter is for all intents and purposes a melee unit, but they have their own signature weapons. Almost every 5-star weapon in this game being made in such a way that only 1 or 2 people can use it to its fullest capacity dampens the average player's ability to comfortably navigate Genshin's experience. More often than not, it's typical for equips to be universal so as to allow players to move them around from one to another, and so all you have to do is get that character. Once that's done, the rest comes easy. I used to play Final Fantasy Brave Exvius for a long time, and in that game, equipment was divided pretty much into 3 categories: damage, defense, and utility. In most cases, all your damage dealers drew from the same pool of equipment, tanks drew from their own pool, supports as well, and they would have the same statistical efficiency regardless of the unit. I'm not trying to say that weapon exclusivity is a bad thing, a lot of games do it, but the fact that Genshin does this every single time is why it's a problem. Character-specific things should come from the characters themselves, that's the whole point of their element, their playstyle, their talents and stuff. It should not be on the weapons because in essence, 5-star weapon passives behave just like constellations. Primordial Jade Cutter grants bonus HP and then bonus attack based on your HP, which sounds very much like something you would see on a 5-star unit's constellation. In my opinion, weapon passives should be made to accommodate situations and playstyles, not characters. Ironically, a lot of the 4 and 3-star weapons do exactly that. Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers grants a massive attack buff when you switch from the one wielding it to someone else. The passive evidently has no effect on the actual wielder, but it presents an alternative way to approach whatever it is you're about to handle. It works on a lot of catalyst supports like Sucrose, Barbara, Mona, etc. The best instance of situation-focused design would be the sacrificial weapons, a sword, claymore, catalyst, and bow, no spear though, that provides energy recharge, and a passive that has a chance to let you reset your elemental skill, allowing you to use it again right after. These are useful for just about any support who wants to spam their elemental burst as much as possible and relies on their skill for battery, like Diona, Shinto, Sucrose, Kujosada, Sayu, etc. If anything, the higher the rarity of the weapon, the more all-purpose it should be. Common sense dictates the harder something is to get, the more of an overall return it should give to make it worth your while, right? 5-star characters may not necessarily be stronger than 4 stars, but they're more consistent. Kazuha, Shogun, and Zhongli are more all-purpose than Xingqiu, Bennett, and Xiangling, despite all 6 being on the same relative scale of power at maximum efficiency. Yet Genshin does the exact opposite when it comes to weapons. The rarer something is, the less number of scenarios you can use it in. From a business standpoint, it would make much more sense for 5-star weapons to be all-purpose if you're trying to sell them. The broader its range of applications are, the more people will want to go after them. Actually, it was like that in the early months of the game. Back in October, Wolf's Gravestone was all the rage because at the time it was generally good on any greatsword user you can think of. Diluc, Chongyun, Razor, Beidou, even Noel to an extent. The Skyward weapons were also pretty solid for their all-encompassing weapon passes on top of their amazing base stats. If you think about it, the less the performance of a weapon is determined by how much the community loves whatever character that weapon's associated with, the better. People who don't care for a unit will also not care about their weapon of choice, thus losing out on sales by extension. Mind you, there are a good number of 5-star weapons that have general applications to them, but since there will always be a better, albeit specific option out there, relatively speaking, you're missing out on what a character is fully capable of. In theory, you could use Song of Broken Pines on a non-physical damage greatsword user, but it won't feel satisfying because you're using that with the knowledge that something better is out there. As silly as it sounds, knowing you're missing something that can enhance the performance or usability of a character affects player psychology a lot more than you think. Having a 5-star character but not their weapon of choice is like taking a test and knowing you can only score a maximum of 90%, not 100. You're never going to be able to experience how strong a character can get. You can devise an entire strategy, team composition, and playstyle around a character, but if you're missing that weapon, you'll never be able to make up for it compared to someone who does. And that's another problem with weapons in this game. There is presently no feasible way for you to obtain good 5-star weapons outside of the gacha banner, or any 5-star weapon at all for that matter. They're just as rare as a 5-star character, yet valued at so much less in actual gameplay compared to them. It would be one thing if the weapon banner had a 5% chance to get a 5-star versus a 0.7, because then it would be sufficiently cheap enough to where you don't have to spend the equivalent of what it takes to get an actual unit. Most people can barely afford to go after one, let alone both. In a way, weapons have their own ridiculous RNG on top of RNG flaw that artifacts have, where even if you do get a good weapon, it may not be the one that you want or can even use, and it's rare for you to find a middle ground. It's absurd to think that the Black Sword is a better second option over Primordial Jade Cutter for someone like Keqing, purely because the weapon passive is completely useless to her. So basically, your only good 5-star weapon on her is the Mistsplitter Reforged. Everything else is just a stat stick. If memory serves, even Ayato's signature sword is worse than the Black Sword because despite providing higher attacking crit stat and even a little bit of elemental damage bonus, you can get 40% increased damage on normal and charge attacks just by doing 5 seasons of Battle Pass, and we've been through at least 10 by now. Yes, there is a correlation between accessibility and the satisfaction you feel when you get something, but if you make it too particular or difficult to acquire, most people won't even bother going through all the trouble to get it, and if you lock that behind a massive paywall, weapon sales will not be all that good. There needs to be a sweet spot of something costing more to where you earn a profit from it, but not too much to turn away prospective buyers. I'm not against the notion of weapon banners, but the way they are now is not only unacceptable but makes little practical sense. This might be too outlandish to suggest, but they can make signature 5-star weapons obtainable in-game as a long-term reward you can grind for. People are naturally more inclined to go after something if they have the means to fully enjoy it, or sometimes that's the only reason they go after something. You ever wonder why fast food places like McDonald's have those combo meals or special deals where if you buy a 10-piece chicken nugget you get a large fry with it for free? That's because it entices you to spend more money than if you were just gonna get that one thing. If you're getting a 10-piece nugget for that large fry, you might as well get a drink to go with it. Or at movie theaters, you're going there to watch a movie and you pass by the concession stand. Well, if you're gonna watch a movie, you might as well get some popcorn with it, and if you're gonna get popcorn, you need a drink with that too, right? Same exact principle for video games. I wouldn't be surprised if people went after Albedo during his rerun purely because of Cinnabar Spindle. In fact, I'm certain of it. So if hypothetically we were to add an NPC with a coin shop that sells you character exclusive weapons or a way to randomly get them, that might be incentive enough for an otherwise unwilling player to maybe go after that unit. Weeks or sometimes months before a new character is introduced to the game, people farm up their Ascension and talent materials ahead of time so that when they finally release, they can enjoy them to the fullest immediately. Now imagine if you were to make their personal weapon attainable in-game, so just do whatever event coincided with their event period. I know it sounds like I'm giving Hoyo a bunch of ideas on how to suck more money out of us, but at the same time, if it leads to a more well-designed game, then I'm all for it. A large reason why would-be whales don't spend money on a game is because they don't think the gratification outweighs the cost to get it. Among many other things, the current weapon system is partially responsible for that. But what do you guys think? If you could change the weapon system in Genshin, how would you go about it? Let me know in the comments down below. Apart from that, if you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter, joining my Discord server, and if you haven't yet, I suggest you check out a similar video I made on artifacts. I think you'll like it a lot. For now, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.